The moment an avoidant sees you again, after a period of silence, something powerful happens beneath the surface. The expression on their face may look calm, their voice may sound normal, their behavior may seem distant, controlled, or even completely unaffected. Yet the first few seconds of that encounter can reveal a deeper emotional process that words often hide. When someone who once created distance suddenly faces the person they stepped away from, the mind begins processing memories, emotions, and unresolved feelings in a very unique way. The surprising part is that the reaction you see may only be the outer layer. Some avoidant individuals have learned to manage uncomfortable emotions by creating emotional space. This protective pattern can make them appear detached, even during moments that carry emotional weight. A simple glance, a short conversation, or even a quiet moment of silence can activate thoughts and feelings connected to the past relationship. In this video, we will explore the psychology behind what happens when an avoidant sees you again after no contact. You will learn about the first reactions that often appear instantly, why someone's may suddenly become more guarded, why they may observe your behavior before saying much, and how their internal conflict between connection and self-protection can shape their actions. We will also look at the lesser-known side of attachment patterns. The human brain has a powerful way of storing emotional experiences, especially with people who created a strong emotional impact. Even when someone chooses distance, the emotional memory connected to that bond can remain active. Understanding this process helps explain why some people appear cold on the outside while experiencing a completely different emotional response internally. This is also about understanding your own position in the situation. After no contact, the biggest change may come from the person who stopped chasing answers and started focusing on personal growth. Your energy, confidence, and emotional stability can change the entire dynamic of an unexpected encounter. Sometimes the strongest message is delivered without saying a single word. Stay until the end, because we will uncover the key signs that reveal whether an avoidant is simply reacting to a familiar presence or whether something deeper is happening emotionally. We will separate real psychological patterns from common misunderstandings and explore why consistent actions matter more than temporary reactions. The interesting part begins when the person who seemed completely detached suddenly has to face the person they were avoiding. In that moment, old emotions, memories, and questions can rise to the surface. The reaction may happen quickly, but the meaning behind it can be far more complex than it appears. Welcome to our channel. Here we explore psychology, emotional healing, relationships, and the hidden patterns behind human behavior. If you enjoy deep insights into the mind and emotional connections, make sure to subscribe and join us for more videos that help you understand yourself and others on a deeper level. When no contact begins, the entire emotional dynamic between two people starts to change because the usual patterns of interaction are suddenly interrupted. During a relationship, an avoidant person may become accustomed to having a certain level of emotional connection available. They may know that the other person is present, willing to communicate, offering support, or providing reassurance. Even if they struggle with emotional closeness, that connection can become part of their daily emotional environment. When no contact removes that access, the familiar pattern disappears, and both people are placed in a completely different emotional situation. One of the biggest changes is the absence of constant emotional feedback. Before no contact, an avoidant person may have received signals that the relationship was still secure. They may have known that the other person cared, that conversations could happen, or that emotional support was available whenever needed. When that disappears, the mind has fewer distractions and fewer external reminders that keep emotions in the background. The silence creates a space where thoughts and feelings that were previously pushed aside can become more noticeable. This does not mean that every avoidant person immediately realizes their feelings or suddenly wants to reconnect. Human emotions are far more complex than that. No contact is not a guaranteed method to make someone miss you or return. Instead, it changes the environment around the relationship. It removes the familiar emotional exchange and allows each person to experience the reality of the connection without the usual patterns that existed before. For someone with avoidant tendencies, emotional distance can sometimes feel comfortable because it reduces the pressure of vulnerability. When closeness becomes intense, creating space may feel like a way to regain control and protect themselves from emotional discomfort. However, emotional distance and emotional resolution are two completely different things. Walking away from a relationship does not always mean a person has fully understood, processed, or accepted what they felt. A person can leave a situation physically while still carrying emotional questions internally. They may remember meaningful moments, conversations, or the emotional safety they experienced with someone. They may think about what happened, why the relationship became difficult, or why they reacted in certain ways.
These thoughts can remain hidden during regular interaction because daily communication creates a constant flow of emotions, responsibilities, and distractions.
When that flow suddenly stops, the mind often begins to process what was previously avoided. The absence of contact can bring attention to feelings that were easier to ignore while the relationship was active. Sometimes people only recognize the impact of a connection after they no longer have immediate access to it. The quiet moments can create awareness because there is less external activity covering up internal emotions. The same process happens on the side as well. No contact changes the emotional experience of the person who chooses to step back. Instead of constantly seeking answers, reassurance, or reactions, they begin creating emotional space for themselves.
This shift can change their perspective because they are no longer responding to every message, every moment of uncertainty, or every change in the other person's behavior.
They begin reconnecting with their own identity outside the relationship dynamic. The psychological power of no contact comes from this change in availability. When someone is always emotionally present, their presence can become familiar and predictable. When that presence suddenly disappears, the brain notices the difference. The person who was always there is no longer filling the same emotional role, and this can create a new awareness of the connection that existed. However, the deeper purpose of no contact is not to control another person's emotions. It is about creating clarity. It allows both individuals to see the relationship from a different perspective. The avoidant person may begin recognizing emotions they previously avoided, while the other person may begin understanding their own needs and boundaries more clearly. Silence has a way of revealing what constant interaction can hide. It creates room for reflection, emotional processing, and a clearer understanding of what the relationship truly meant. The absence of communication does not create feelings that were never there, but it can bring attention to emotions that were already present and waiting to be acknowledged. When an avoidant person suddenly sees you again after a period of no contact, the first reaction may happen before any words are exchanged. In those first few moments, the mind begins collecting information. Their attention may naturally move toward you as they try to understand the situation in front of them. They may notice your facial expression, your body language, your tone of voice, and even the way you carry yourself. These small details can provide clues about how you are changed since the last time I saw you. This process is often called emotional scanning. Human beings naturally pay closer attention to people who have had emotional significance in their lives. When someone has been part of an important connection, the brain becomes more alert to their presence. A person may unconsciously look for familiar signs, changes, or emotional signals. They may wonder whether you seem hurt, whether you appear happy, whether you are trying to avoid them, or whether you seem completely comfortable without their presence. For an avoidant person, this moment can create an interesting internal conflict. Avoidant attachment patterns are often connected with the discomfort around emotional vulnerability and intense closeness. A person may have learned to create
Distance when emotions feel overwhelming. However, creating distance does not mean the emotional connection disappears completely.
Someone can struggle with intimacy while still experiencing strong emotional actions when faced with a person who had a meaningful impact on their life. This is why their first response may be observation rather than direct communication. Instead of immediately expressing what they feel, they may watch and analyze the situation. They may try to understand your emotional state before deciding how open or distant they should appear. Their mind may be asking silent questions. Are you still affected by what happened? Do you seem different from before? Are you waiting for a reaction from them? Have you moved forward emotionally? These thoughts may happen quickly, sometimes within seconds. The person may not even be fully aware that they are doing it. The human brain is designed to recognize emotional changes, especially in relationships where there has been attachment, conflict, or unresolved feelings. When someone important appears again after a long silence, the brain naturally searches for information that helps make sense of the moment. A common misunderstanding is believing that the first visible reaction tells the entire story. Someone may appear calm, serious, or emotionally distant, but their internal experience may be much more complicated. Emotional control on the outside does not always represent emotional absence on the inside. Some people have developed the ability to hide discomfort, confusion, or vulnerability because showing those feelings feels unsafe or unfamiliar. This is especially important when looking at avoidant behavior. A person with avoidant tendencies may have learned to manage emotional situations by staying composed. Instead of immediately showing excitement, sadness, regret, or nervousness, they may focus on maintaining control. Their first instinct may be to gather information rather than reveal information. The interesting part is that the person they are observing may have changed during the period of no contact. They may notice a different level of confidence, calmness, or independence. They may recognize that the person in front of them is no longer reacting in the same way as before. This difference can create a new emotional experience because the old relationship pattern is no longer present. The first thing they do may have less to do with what they say and more to do with what they are trying to figure out. Before a conversation begins, before explanations are given, and before emotions are openly discussed, the mind is already searching for answers. It is trying to understand whether the connection feels the same, whether the other person has changed, and whether the emotional distance created during no contact has altered the entire dynamic between them. When an avoidant person sees you again after a period of no contact, one of the most confusing reactions can be the sudden appearance of extreme emotional control. Instead of showing surprise, nervousness, excitement, or discomfort, they may become unusually composed. Their body language may appear relaxed. Their voice may become calm and neutral. Their facial expression may reveal very little. From the outside, it can look as though the encounter has no emotional impact at all. However, human emotions are often more complicated than what is visible on the surface. For some people, especially those who struggle with emotional vulnerability, controlling their outward reaction can become a natural protective response. When a situation feels emotionally intense, the mind may focus on maintaining stability rather than expressing feelings openly. A person may quickly shift into a controlled state because showing emotion feels uncomfortable, risky, or unfamiliar. Instead of allowing the moment to unfold naturally, they may automatically create emotional distance through their behavior. This is where confusion often begins. Someone may look completely unaffected, yet the situation itself may carry emotional importance for them. The calm expression, limited conversation, or neutral tone can make the other person wonder whether the connection ever mattered. But a controlled reaction does not always mean a person feels nothing. Sometimes it reflects a person's ability or habit of managing what they reveal. There is an important difference between emotional suppression and emotional absence. I mean, there's little emotional response happening internally. Emotional suppression means emotions may exist, but the person is choosing, consciously or unconsciously, to keep those emotions from being displayed. A person may feel uncomfortable, curious, uncertain, or emotionally activated while still presenting a calm exterior. This pattern appears in people who have learned to handle difficult emotions by pushing them away. Instead of immediately exploring what they feel, they may focus on staying in control. They may avoid showing signs of vulnerability because vulnerability requires openness, and openness can feel challenging for someone who has built emotional protection around themselves. However, it is also important to understand that a distant reaction does not automatically prove hidden love, regret, or a desire to reconnect. Human behavior has many possible explanations. Someone may appear distant because they feel uncomfortable, because they want to maintain boundaries, because they are unsure how to respond, or because they have genuinely moved on. Looking for one specific meaning behind every reaction can create misunderstandings. The most accurate way to understand a person's emotions is through consistent patterns over time, not one brief encounter. A single facial expression, a short conversation, or a calm response can provide information, but it cannot reveal the complete emotional reality of another person. People process relationships differently, and their external behavior may be influenced by personality, past experiences, emotional skills, and their current mindset. The reason this behavior feels so confusing is because people naturally expect emotions to appear in visible ways. If someone cares, we often expect warmth. If someone feels hurt, we expect sadness. If someone misses someone, we expect them to show it. But human beings do not always express emotions in direct or predictable ways. Some people become more expressive when emotions are strong, while others become quieter and more controlled. When an avoidant person suddenly becomes composed, the key question is not simply, why are they acting like they do not care? A deeper question is, what role does emotional control play in the way they handle difficult moments? Understanding this difference helps separate appearance from reality. A calm reaction may reveal self-control, discomfort, uncertainty, or emotional protection. But the true meaning can only be understood through their actions, communication, and behavior over time. Looking calm does not necessarily tell you what someone feels internally. The outside reaction is only one part of the story. The deeper emotional process may be beneath the surface, waiting to be understood through the patterns that follow the moment. When an avoidant person sees you again after a period of no contact, one of the most noticeable behaviors can be the sudden appearance of the "I'm fine" response. They may quickly communicate that everything is okay. They may smile, speak casually, and act as though the moment is completely ordinary. Instead of addressing the emotional history between you, they may focus on simple topics, everyday conversations, or surface-level interactions. This reaction can feel confusing because the situation may carry emotional weight, yet their behavior suggests that nothing significant is happening. This type of response can often be connected to emotional self-protection. For some people, appearing calm and unaffected creates a sense of safety. When emotions become intense, their first instinct may be to reduce the emotional pressure rather than move toward deeper discussion. Talking about normal things, keeping the conversation light, or avoiding serious topics can become a way to maintain control over a situation that feels emotionally uncertain. A person may choose to discuss work, daily activities, general updates, or unrelated topics instead of bringing attention to the relationship. They may seem comfortable and socially confident, almost as if the previous emotional distance never happened. This can leave the other person wondering whether the relationship mattered or whether the connection was easily forgotten. However, the way someone manages a difficult emotional moment does not always reflect the full depth of their internal experience. For someone with avoidant tendencies, emotional conversations can sometimes feel overwhelming because they require openness, vulnerability, and the ability to sit with uncomfortable feelings. If a person has learned throughout their life that emotional dependence creates discomfort or pressure, they may develop strategies that help them stay protected. Acting casual can become one of those strategies. By keeping things light, they avoid entering a conversation where they may feel exposed or emotionally unprepared. This does not mean every avoidant person is intentionally pretending or trying to create a false image. Emotional defenses often happen automatically. A person may not consciously think, I need to hide my feelings right now. Instead, their mind may naturally move toward behaviors that have helped them feel safe in the past. Staying composed, avoiding emotional discussions, and focusing on practical topics can become familiar ways of handling emotional intensity. The interesting part is that emotional protection can sometimes create the exact confusion that the person is trying to avoid. By refusing to show uncertainty or vulnerability, they may appear more distant than they actually feel. The other person may interpret the behavior as a lack of care, while the avoidant person may simply be trying to manage an uncomfortable emotional situation in the only way they know. This is why looking beyond the surface behavior is important. A casual conversation does not always mean the encounter had no impact. A confident attitude does not always mean there is complete emotional detachment. At the same time, it is also important to avoid assuming that every calm reaction hides deep feelings.
The goal is to understand the possible psychological patterns without turning every action into proof of a specific emotion.
Healthy understanding comes from observing consistent behavior rather than focusing on one moment. Does the person communicate honestly over time? Do they show emotional growth? Are they willing to discuss difficult topics when the opportunity appears? These patterns provide more meaningful information than a single interaction where someone chooses to stay composed. The I'm fine performance is often less about the words themselves and more about what happens beneath those words. It can represent a person attempting to maintain emotional balance when faced with a situation that feels complicated. Their casual attitude, controlled responses, and avoidance of deeper conversations may reveal a protective habit built around manage, closeness, and emotional uncertainty.
Sometimes the strongest emotional reactions are hidden behind the calmest appearances.
A person may choose
Normal conversation because it feels safer than revealing what is happening internally.
Understanding this behavior requires looking beyond the immediate reaction and recognizing the complex relationship between emotional protection, vulnerability, and human connection. When an avoidant person sees you again after a period of no contact, one of the most interesting psychological processes that can happen is the comparison between who you are now and who you were before. The brain naturally looks for changes when we reconnect with someone from our past. It compares memories with present experiences. It searches for differences, new information, and signs that the relationship dynamic has shifted. After a period of silence, the person they remember may no longer match the person standing in front of them. During the relationship, an avoidant person may have experienced you through a familiar pattern. They may remember your reactions, your emotional availability, the way you communicated, and the role you played in their life. However, no contact creates a period where they no longer have access to those daily interactions. They cannot see how you are changing, how you are processing emotions, or how you were rebuilding your life. When they finally see you again, they receive new information that challenges their old perception. They may notice changes that were impossible to observe from a distance. They may see a different level of confidence in the way you carry yourself. They may recognize that you seem calmer, more emotionally balanced, or less focused on gaining their attention. They may notice that your energy feels different because you have spent time focusing on yourself rather than waiting for their response. One of the biggest shifts can be the realization that you continued living without their involvement. This can create a powerful psychological moment because people often become aware of the importance of something when they see that it exists separately from them. The person who was once constantly available may now appear more independent. The person who once looked for answers may now seem comfortable without needing explanations. This change can alter the emotional dynamic between two people. Independence can be especially noticeable because it challenges previous expectations. If an avoidant person became used to knowing that someone would always be emotionally available, seeing that person become more self-sufficient can create a new perspective. They may begin recognizing that the relationship was not frozen in time. While they were experiencing distance, the other person was growing, adapting, and creating a different emotional foundation. The reaction they have to this change can vary greatly. Some people may feel curiosity. Some may feel surprise. Some may become more interested in reconnecting. Others may feel uncomfortable because the familiar relationship pattern is no longer there. The important point is that change becomes visible. The person they encounter is no longer only connected to old memories. They are experiencing the current version of someone who has developed through time and personal growth. This is where an important psychological question appears. What happens when the person someone expected to remain emotionally available suddenly appears emotionally independent? The answer depends on the individual, their emotional awareness, and their ability to handle vulnerability. For some people, this moment creates reflection. They may begin thinking about what they lost, what changed, and how their actions contributed to the distance between them. However, it is important to understand that noticing change does not automatically mean someone is ready for a healthier relationship. Awareness and emotional growth are different things. A person may recognize that someone has changed while still struggling with the same patterns that created distance before. Real transformation requires more than recognizing someone's value. It requires emotional responsibility, communication, and the willingness to approach connection differently. The most powerful part of this shift is that the focus moves away from trying to prove your worth to someone else. The change they notice is often the result of your own emotional development. Your confidence, boundaries, and independence become visible because they are genuine parts of who you have become. The encounter becomes less about whether they approve of your growth and more about recognizing the person you have become during the time apart. When an avoidant person sees you again after a period of no contact, the focus often shifts toward one important element that is easy to overlook: your reaction. While it may seem like the attention should be on what they are thinking or feeling, the way you respond during that moment can strongly influence the emotional dynamic between both people. Human beings naturally pay attention to emotional signals, especially in situations involving past connections, unresolved feelings, or meaningful relationships. An avoidant person may unconsciously look for familiar patterns. They may notice whether you seem nervous, whether you are trying to reconnect immediately,
whether you appear upset, or whether you seem completely comfortable with the situation.
These observations can give them information about how much the previous relationship dynamic has changed. They may be comparing your current behavior with the version of you they remember. For example, if someone approaches an encounter expecting the other person to still be emotionally affected, they may pay close attention to signs of that attachment. They may look for signs that you still need their attention, approval, or reassurance. They may notice whether you are trying to create a conversation, whether you are searching for emotional validation, or whether you are waiting for them to make the first move. These small details can influence how they interpret the current connection. At the same time, your reaction is not about creating a performance or trying to send a specific message. The goal is not to act cold, distant, or uninterested, just to create a reaction from someone else. Trying to control another person's emotions often keeps you connected to the same cycle of seeking validation. Real emotional strength comes from responding in a way that reflects your actual growth rather than trying to influence their behavior. A calm and grounded response can create a completely different interaction from the one they remember. If the previous relationship involved anxiety, constant reassurance, emotional chasing, or uncertainty, seeing someone who is now more stable can change the entire atmosphere. The other person may recognize that the old pattern is no longer active. The emotional balance between two people begins to shift when one person stops depending on the other person's reaction for their own sense of security. This does not mean that being calm will always create a specific response from an avoidant person. Every individual has different experiences, emotions, and levels of self-awareness. A calm reaction does not guarantee that someone will return, apologize, or suddenly become emotionally available. The value of emotional stability comes from what it creates within you, not from the response it produces in someone else. One of the most powerful changes after no contact is when a person stops entering an interaction from a place of fear. Instead of thinking, how do I make them understand my value? The mindset begins to shift toward, how do I stay connected to myself during this moment? This change creates a different type of presence. You are no longer reacting only to their behavior. You are responding based on your own emotional clarity. A person who has developed emotional stability may still feel emotions during the encounter. They may feel nervous, surprised, or even affected by seeing someone from their past. The difference is that they are able to experience those emotions without allowing them to control their actions. They can remain respectful, calm, and connected to their own boundaries. Your reaction becomes important because it reflects the relationship you have built with yourself during the time apart. It shows whether you are still trapped in the old emotional pattern or whether you have created a healthier foundation. The most meaningful shift is not making an avoidant person notice your absence. The most meaningful shift is being someone who no longer needs their reaction to feel secure. The goal should never be to manufacture a reaction from an avoidant. The healthier goal is genuine emotional stability. When you approach the situation from a place of self-respect and inner balance, the encounter becomes less about proving something to another person and more about honoring the growth you have created within yourself. One of the most confusing parts of an avoidant dynamic is that the feeling of distance can sometimes become more noticeable after separation. During the relationship, emotional closeness may have created a complicated experience. On one side, connection, affection, and support may have felt meaningful. On the other side, the intensity of emotional closeness may have created discomfort or pressure. For someone who struggles with vulnerability, being deeply connected to another person can sometimes activate a desire to create space and regain emotional control. This creates a situation where closeness and distance can have different emotional meanings. When connection is available, a person may focus more on the challenges of intimacy, the fear of losing independence, or the discomfort of emotional exposure. Creating distance can feel like a way to reduce that pressure. However, once the connection is removed completely, the experience can change. The person no longer has the same access to the emotional bond, the familiar presence, or the reassurance that existed before. This is where some people begin to notice the absence more clearly. During the relationship, the emotional connection may have become part of their everyday experience. Even if they struggled with expressing feelings or maintaining closeness, the other person was still a consistent part of their emotional world. After separation, the brain begins adjusting to a new reality where that familiar presence is missing. The silence can make the difference between the past and the present much more visible. This does not mean that every avoidant person will suddenly miss someone or want to reconnect. Human emotions are personal and influenced by many factors, including personality, life experiences, emotional awareness, and the quality of the relationship itself. Attachment patterns can help explain possible behaviors, but they cannot predict exactly how one individual will think, feel, or act. Attachment theory suggests that people develop different ways of responding to closeness, emotional needs, and relationships. Some people may feel comfortable with emotional intimacy, while others may experience stronger discomfort when they feel dependent or deeply connected. These patterns are not permanent labels or diagnoses. They are simply ways of understanding how some people may respond to emotional situations. For someone with avoidant tendencies, separation can sometimes create a new emotional experience because the usual protective strategy of creating space no longer has the same effect. When closeness feels overwhelming, distance may seem like relief, but when distance becomes complete absence, the person may begin experiencing a different side of the situation. The thing that once felt too intense may now feel missing. This creates the possibility of a push-pull dynamic. A person may want emotional connection, but also feel uncomfortable with the vulnerability that comes with it. They may feel drawn towards someone while also feeling the urge to protect themselves. This internal conflict can create confusing behavior, where someone appears interested at one moment and distant at another. The important psychological idea is that emotional distance does not always mean emotional resolution. A person can create space without fully processing what the relationship meant to them. They may move forward in daily life while still carrying memories, questions, or emotions connected to the bond. Sometimes separation removes the distractions that allowed those feelings to stay in the background. When an avoidant person suddenly feels the distance, it may be because the emotional reality of the separation becomes clearer. The absence of communication, support, and familiarity
Can highlight the role the relationship played in their life.
This moment can create reflection, but
Reflection alone does not guarantee change. Emotional growth requires awareness, responsibility,
and a willingness to approach relationships differently. Understanding this process helps explain why some people become more emotionally activated after separation. The change is not always about suddenly developing feelings that were never there. Sometimes it is about finally experiencing the impact of a connection that was easier to overlook when it was constantly available. The absence creates a different emotional environment where thoughts, memories, and unresolved feelings may become harder to ignore. When an avoidant person sees someone from their past after a period of no contact, a powerful internal conflict can begin. The moment can activate two different emotional responses at the same time. One part of them may feel curiosity, familiarity, or a desire to reconnect. Another part may feel the need to protect themselves, maintain emotional distance, or avoid vulnerability. This internal struggle can create behavior that appears confusing from the outside, because their actions may seem to move in opposite directions. The desire for connection and the desire for emotional safety can exist together. Human beings are complex, and emotions do not always follow a simple path. A person can miss someone while still feeling uncomfortable with closeness. They can care about a connection while also fearing the emotional intensity that comes with rebuilding it. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this concept can become especially noticeable because emotional closeness may bring both positive feelings and feelings of pressure. This is why some people may display contradictory behavior after seeing someone again. They may approach and start a conversation, showing signs of openness and interest. They may ask questions, appear engaged, or seem happy to reconnect. Then, shortly afterward, they may become more distant, less expressive, or emotionally unavailable. The sudden change can feel confusing because the interaction started with a completely different energy. These shifts often happen because the person is managing two competing needs. The need for connection says, "This person matters to me." The need for protection says, "I need to avoid becoming too emotionally exposed." When these two reactions compete, the person may move closer and then create distance again. This pattern can feel unpredictable because the internal struggle is not always visible. A common example is when someone appears warm at the beginning of an interaction but becomes colder once the conversation becomes more personal.
They may be comfortable discussing everyday topics, but become uncomfortable when the discussion moves toward emotions, the past relationship,
Or deeper questions. The change is not always about losing interest in that moment. Sometimes it reflects discomfort with emotional vulnerability. However, it is important to understand that inconsistent behavior does not automatically mean someone has hidden feelings or a desire to return. There can be different reasons behind someone's actions. They may feel uncertain, they may be protecting their boundaries, or they may simply have difficulty communicating emotions. Understanding attachment patterns can provide insight, but it should never become a way of reading someone's mind. The reason inconsistency often feels so powerful is because people naturally focus on individual moments. A warm message, a meaningful conversation, or a sudden moment of attention can feel like a major sign. A cold response afterward can feel like a complete rejection. But a single moment rarely reveals the full emotional picture. The deeper pattern over time provides much more information. The most important thing to observe is whether their actions become consistent. Someone who genuinely wants to rebuild a connection will usually show that through steady communication, emotional responsibility, and a willingness to address difficult topics. Temporary moments of closeness can happen for many reasons, but lasting change requires effort and emotional maturity. The internal conflict between approaching and pulling away explains why some encounters after no contact can feel emotionally intense. The person may be experiencing a battle between wanting familiarity and protecting themselves from emotional discomfort. Their behavior may reflect this struggle, but the responsibility of understanding and managing that struggle belongs to them. And this is where many people make their biggest mistake. They begin analyzing every small action, every facial expression, and every change in tone, searching for proof of what the other person feels. They become focused on decoding the other person instead of attending to the important question, whether the relationship dynamic is actually becoming healthier and more emotionally secure. One of the biggest mistakes people make after seeing an avoidant person again is trying to decode every small action and turn it into a hidden message. When emotions are involved, the human mind naturally searches for answers. A simple glance, a change in tone, a short conversation, or a moment of silence can start feeling like a clue that reveals everything happening inside the other person. However, human behavior is far more complex than a single moment can explain. A glance does not prove love. Someone looking at you for a few seconds may mean many different things. They may be remembering the past, feeling curious, feeling uncomfortable, or simply reacting to seeing someone familiar. The mind often wants to create a clear story from unclear information, especially when the relationship had emotional importance. This is why it is important to avoid placing too much meaning on one small behavior. The same applies to nervousness. If someone appears uncomfortable, quiet, or unsure during an encounter, it does not automatically prove regret. Nervousness can come from different emotions and experiences. A person may feel uncertain about what to say, uncomfortable with the situation, surprised by the meeting, or simply unsure about how to behave. The reaction itself provides information, but it does not reveal the complete emotional truth. Silence is another behavior that people often misunderstand. A quiet response does not always mean someone is secretly missing you. Sometimes silence can reflect home processing discomfort, uncertainty, or a decision to maintain distance. The meaning behind silence depends on the larger pattern of behavior, the history between two people, and the choices someone makes afterward. The same caution applies when an avoidant person suddenly reaches out after a period of no contact. A message can feel powerful, especially after a long period of emotional distance. It can create hope, excitement, and questions about what has changed. However, a sudden message does not automatically mean emotional transformation has happened. A person reaching out may be experiencing curiosity, loneliness, nostalgia, or a genuine desire to reconnect. The important question is what happens after the first contact. This is where understanding attachment patterns requires balance. Attachment theory can help explain why some people struggle with closeness, vulnerability, or emotional communication. However, it should never become a tool for reading someone's mind. No psychological concept can tell you exactly what another person is thinking or feeling in a specific moment. People are influenced by their personal history, emotional skills, current circumstances, and willingness to grow. The strongest evidence comes from consistent behavior over time. Someone's true intentions are revealed through patterns rather than isolated moments. Do they communicate openly? Do they acknowledge past problems? Do they show emotional responsibility? Do they respect boundaries? Do they make an effort to create a healthier connection? These actions provide a much clearer understanding than trying to interpret every small signal. A healthy relationship requires more than attraction, memories, or emotional intensity. It requires communication, accountability, and emotional availability. Two people can have a strong connection and still struggle if they are unable to communicate honestly or handle difficult emotions in a healthy way.
Real change is shown through effort and consistency, not just through temporary moments of closeness. The desire to understand another person is completely natural, especially when there are unanswered questions.
But constantly analyzing every move can keep someone trapped in uncertainty. Instead of focusing only on what an avoidant person might be feeling, it is important to look at the bigger picture. The most valuable information comes from how someone chooses to show up, how they treat the connection, and whether their actions create emotional safety. The goal is not to become an expert at decoding another person's behavior. The goal is to recognize patterns, protect your emotional well-being, and understand what creates a healthy relationship. A single moment can create curiosity, but consistent actions reveal the truth. After an unexpected encounter with an avoidant person, it can be easy to become focused on the moment itself. The look they gave, the words they used, the way they reacted, or the emotions they appeared to show can feel extremely important. However, the encounter itself is only one piece of information. The real understanding comes from what happens afterward. A single meeting can reveal that there is still some emotional connection or unfinished history, but their continued behavior shows whether they are truly capable of creating a healthier dynamic. The first thing to pay attention to is communication. Do they communicate clearly, or do they return to confusion and uncertainty? Healthy connection requires honesty and openness. Someone who wants to rebuild trust will usually make an effort to express their thoughts, explain their intentions, and create a space where both people can understand each other.
Avoiding difficult conversations or leaving the other person constantly guessing can recreate the same emotional patterns. that cause distance in the first place.
Another important factor is whether they acknowledge what happened. Every relationship has moments of misunderstanding, hurt, or emotional distance. Moving forward requires the ability to recognize those moments instead of ignoring them. A person who is emotionally ready for a healthier connection can look back at past situations with awareness. They can recognize their role, understand the impact of their actions, and have conversations about what needs to change. Taking responsibility is another sign of emotional growth. A person does not need to be perfect to build a healthy relationship, but they do need to be willing to reflect on their behavior. Responsibility means being able to say, I understand how my actions affected you, rather than avoiding every uncomfortable topic. Without accountability, the same patterns often repeat because the underlying issues remain unresolved. Boundaries also become extremely important after an encounter. A healthier connection requires respect for each person's emotional needs, personal space, and limits. Someone who genuinely values the relationship will not only focus on what they want, they will also consider how their actions affect the other person. Respecting boundaries shows emotional maturity because it demonstrates that connection is built through mutual understanding rather than pressure or control. Consistency is one of the clearest indicators of genuine change. A person may have a meaningful conversation, show emotion, or express interest during one moment. However, real transformation is revealed through repeated behavior. Do their actions match their words? Do they continue showing effort after the initial emotional moment passes? Do they remain present when conversations become difficult? Consistency separates temporary emotions from lasting change. Emotional vulnerability is another important part of building something healthier. A person who is willing to open up, communicate their feelings, and discuss uncomfortable topics is showing a greater ability to create emotional intimacy. Vulnerability does not mean sharing everything immediately, or it means having the courage to be honest instead of relying only on distance and emotional protection. The most important question after an encounter is whether both people are moving toward a healthier connection. Are they simply reacting to the emotions of the moment, or are they willing to create something different? A person can feel nostalgia, miss someone, or become emotionally affected by seeing them again. But a healthy relationship requires more than feelings. It requires effort, understanding, and the ability to handle emotional challenges together. This is why focusing on behavior is more valuable than focusing on assumptions. Trying to guess what someone feels internally can create endless uncertainty. Looking at their choices provides clearer answers. Their willingness to communicate, take responsibility, respect boundaries, and show consistent effort reveals much more than a single emotional encounter ever could. The encounter itself is only information. It can open a door to understanding, but their behavior afterward tells you much more. The way someone chooses to show up after that moment reveals whether they are ready to create a relationship based on trust, emotional safety, and genuine connection. The deeper lesson about no contact is often misunderstood because many people see it only as a way to create a reaction from another person. They may hope that silence will make someone miss them, while distance can sometimes change the way people view a relationship. The true purpose of no contact goes much deeper than trying to influence another person's emotions. Its real power comes from creating space for personal reflection, emotional clarity, and growth. When no contact begins, one of the biggest changes is the removal of constant emotional monitoring. During an uncertain relationship dynamic, a person may spend a lot of energy analyzing messages, waiting for responses, interpreting changes in behavior, or searching for signs of what the other person feels. This constant focus can create emotional exhaustion because your sense of peace becomes connected to someone else's actions. No contact creates an opportunity to step away from that cycle and reconnect with yourself. Emotional space allows you to see the relationship from a different perspective. When you are deeply involved in a situation, emotions can make it difficult to understand what is truly happening. Distance gives your mind room to process experiences without the constant influence of new interactions. You can begin recognizing patterns, understanding your own reactions, and asking important questions about what you genuinely need from a relationship. One of the most important changes during no
Contact is learning to separate your self-worth from another person's response. When someone becomes emotionally distant, it can create a strong desire to seek reassurance.
You may feel the need to prove your value, gain their attention, or find an explanation for their behavior. However, true emotional stability begins when your confidence is no longer dependent on whether someone chooses to stay, return, or provide the validation you were hoping for. This does not mean that feelings disappear immediately. Missing someone, feeling hurt, or wondering about the future are natural parts of emotional processing. The difference is that you begin experiencing those emotions without allowing them to control your entire sense of identity. You can acknowledge the connection you had while also recognizing that your own emotional needs matter. No contact also creates an opportunity to understand your own boundaries. Sometimes people become so focused on understanding another person's behavior that they forget to examine their own experiences. They may ask why someone pulled away, why they became distant, or why they struggled with closeness. These questions can be meaningful, but another equally important question is, how did this relationship affect me, and what do I need moving forward? The healing process becomes stronger when the focus shifts from controlling outcomes to building inner stability. Whether the other person returns or remains distant, your growth does not have to stop. Your progress is not determined by whether someone recognizes your value. It is determined by how you continue caring for yourself, understanding your emotions, and creating healthier patterns in your life. No contact is not about creating punishment, playing games, or trying to force someone into a specific response. It is about creating a healthier emotional environment where both people have the space to reflect. Sometimes that reflection leads to reconnection. Sometimes it leads to acceptance and moving forward separately. The important part is that your emotional well-being is no longer placed entirely in someone else's hands.
The greatest transformation that can come from no contact is the realization that your peace does not depend on another person's decision.
Their actions may change, their feelings may change, or their path may move in a different direction. But your ability to heal, grow, and build a stronger relationship with yourself can continue regardless of what happens next. The purpose of no contact was never to make someone feel your absence.
The deeper purpose was to help you stop abandoning your own needs while waiting for someone else to choose you.
It creates the space to rebuild confidence, understand your emotions, and recognize that your life continues beyond any one relationship. Seeing an avoidant person after a period of no contact can reveal a powerful shift in the emotional dynamic. The moment may feel unexpected because the person who once seemed distant is suddenly standing in front of you again. They may appear calm, controlled, or completely unaffected, but behind that calm exterior, they may be processing the reality of the encounter in their own way. They may be observing before speaking, trying to understand how much has changed, or protecting themselves by keeping their emotions carefully managed. The most interesting part is often the contrast between the past and the present. They may remember the old relationship, the way conversations happened, the emotions that existed, and the role each person played. But when they see you again, they may encounter a version of you that has grown, changed, and developed a different level of emotional strength. The person they expected to see may no longer be the person standing in front of them. However, The most important lesson is not to become trapped in trying to decode every signal. A glance, a quiet moment, a nervous reaction, or a sudden message can create curiosity. But these moments alone cannot reveal the complete truth about someone's feelings. The real answers come from patterns, consistency, and the choices a person makes after the encounter.
The most powerful change after no contact is not necessarily that the avoidant suddenly misses you.
The most powerful to change is that you no longer need their reaction to determine your worth. If they approach you, pay attention to their actions. Look for honesty, effort, and emotional responsibility. If they stay distant, respect that distance and continue protecting your own peace. If they return, do not focus only on the intensity of the moment. Look for consistency, growth, and a genuine willingness to create something healthier. Because the real transformation begins when you stop asking, what are they feeling? And you start asking, is this relationship capable of giving me what I genuinely need? That shift changes everything. It moves you away from constantly searching for answers outside yourself and brings your attention back to your own emotional well-being. A healthy connection is not built on confusion, guessing, or chasing signs. It is built on mutual effort, understanding, communication, and respect. No contact is not about proving your value to someone else. Your value was never dependent on whether someone recognized it.
The true victory is reaching a place where you can care about someone whilst choosing yourself.
Whether the relationship continues or ends, your growth remains yours. Have you ever unexpectedly seen someone after a period of no contact that their behavior felt completely different? Share your experience in the comments because your story may help someone else understand their own situation. If this video gave you a deeper understanding of avoidant behavior, emotional patterns, and relationships, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more insights into psychology, healing, and human connection.